Episode 1. Back in the present, Joe finds Marianne in London but decides to let her go after she accuses him of being a murderer. Elliot Tannenberg, a fixer working for Love's father, meets Joe later and provides him with a cover identity in exchange for killing Marianne in order to close some loose ends. To make it seem as though he killed Marianne, Joe instead pickpockets her necklace and sends Elliot a picture of it. Joe now goes by the name Jonathan Moore, an English professor who lives in the present. He becomes intrigued by Kate Galvin, his annoying colleague Professor Malcolm Harding's girlfriend who resides in the apartment across from him. Following Joe's successful rescue of Kate from two would-be assailants, Malcolm extends an invitation to him to a party at the upscale Sundry House, where he meets author and mayoral candidate Reese Montrose. After becoming very drunk at the party, Joe wakes up in his apartment to discover Malcolm dead from a stabbing and missing a finger. Joe disposes of Malcolm's body, assuming he killed him before going unconscious. Kate invites Joe to supper the following evening. As Joe gets there, Malcolm's real killer sends him a string of anonymous texts to praise him for getting rid of the evidence. Episode 2. Joe is invited to an art exhibition organized by Kate and featuring Simon Sue, a billionaire's son who is a friend of theirs, by her best friend, the aristocrat Lady Phoebe. As Joe breaks into Malcolm's office, he discovers a list of contacts with codenames and a ledger of gambling debts. Before Adam's security Vic stops him, Joe pursues Phoebe's boyfriend Adam Pratt, an American expat who owns Sundry House, and learns that he has a penchant for being urinated on by males. A lady who Joe and Kate eventually discover to be the genuine artist behind the paintings and who Simon drugged up to discredit her vandalizes Simon's artwork during the show. Joe thinks Simon killed Malcolm to avoid being extorted since he saw a reference to the artwork in Malcolm's ledger. However, Simon is slain that night, and the murderer cut off one of his ears. As Joe gets home, the murderer has discovered his real name and has covered his wall with newspaper cuttings from his history. Episode 3. The "Eat the Rich" killer is revealed to be the assassin after sending Malcolm's finger to the media. Joe learns that Nadia, one of his students, had a sexual relationship with Malcolm. The murderer gives Joe the go-ahead to kill Kate during Simon's funeral. Although first wary of Joe, Kate eventually warms up to him, and the two have sex while Vic isn't looking. Joe follows Kate about to protect her. The following day, Vic, who is following Joe, searches him under duress and discovers Malcolm's ring, which Joe understands was planted on him. Vic was paying homage to Malcolm as she left. After a fight, Joe is forced to murder Vic. Joe goes along and tells the murderer to let him finish Kate, and the murderer sets up a rendezvous with him after implying that Joe is aroused by murder. The police are ready to question Joe when Phoebe calls him to Sundry House. Episode 4. For a weekend escape, Joe is invited to Phoebe's family's country estate. He notices how harsh her friends are to the staff, especially Gemma, a socialite. Phoebe's attempt to woo Joe is unsuccessful, so she confides in him her worry that Adam doesn't love her. While this is going on, Adam confides in Joe that he intends to pop the question to Phoebe, in part because of the fact that the wealth of her family would save him from mounting debts that his affluent father is no longer willing to pay off. Joe finds himself at conflict with Roald Walker Burton, a boyhood friend of Kate who Joe learns is infatuated with her. In the midst of Gemma's accusation that Joe is the murderer, Roald chastises Kate for not recognizing herself as one of them during supper. Later, Kate tells Joe about her enormously wealthy investor father, with whom she has severed relations because of the damage his business practices have caused to the globe. Joe realizes he might have feelings for Kate. Joe is forced out of a second-story window by Roald after being questioned by him about being the murderer. When Joe regains consciousness, he hears a scream. He rushes to rescue Kate but finds her kneeling over Gemma's body with a knife in her hand. Episode 5. Kate adamantly denies murdering Gemma. While the others are having fun, Joe starts to believe her and assists her in burying the body in a barn. Kate questions Joe about his background after observing that he appears to have expertise hiding murders. Joe admits to disposing of Malcolm's body and claims that the same people who tried to frame Malcolm are now trying to frame Kate. When Kate is gone instructing Phoebe to fire the servants, Roald finds Joe in the barn and brings him before the others, accusing him of being the murderer. Joe objects, but Roald allows him the opportunity to get away before pursuing him with a shotgun.
Roald is subdued by Joe in the woods, but the true murderer, Reese, who was born into poverty and harbored animosity for the wealthy, later kidnaps Joe and imprisons him in a dungeon. In order to put Roald on trial for the killings, Reese orders Joe to murder the man. As Joe declines, Reese ignites the prison and flees. Joe escapes, liberating Roald, and Kate saves the two. Joe keeps the others in the dark about Reese and makes a personal commitment to bring him down. Reese declares his intention to run for mayor of London.
Episode 6. Reese locks Simon's severed ear in his freezer and orders Joe to find someone to blame for the killings. Connie, a member of the Oxford group who confides his issues with addiction, is initially Joe's target for framing, but he ultimately changes his mind when Connie resolves to quit using. At Kate's most recent gallery fundraiser, Dawn, a woman disguised as a waitress, takes Phoebe to a hotel room and locks them inside. Dawn has a parasocial infatuation with Phoebe. Before the police arrive to detain Dawn for the "Eat the Rich" killings, Joe wrangles his way into the room and snucks Simon's ear into Dawn's suitcase. As a result of seeing the arrest, Nadia has doubts about Joe. Phoebe declines Adam's marriage proposal after learning about his financial troubles from Dawn. Once Kate makes a pledge not to ask about Joe's past, Joe and Kate declare their affections for one another. Joe's final assignment from Reese is to assassinate Tom Lockwood, a rival political contributor and Kate's father. Episode 7. When Joe joins Kate and her visiting father for dinner in London, Lockwood confesses that he is aware of Joe's true identity. A quick piece by Lockwood exposing Reese's fabrication of most of his memoir is published. When Reese admits to taking Marianne hostage, he makes Joe kill Lockwood in order to save her. After being abducted, Phoebe experiences PTSD symptoms. Kate arranges for her to stay at a clinic, but Phoebe chooses to wed Adam instead. Joe is ready to kill Lockwood, but Lockwood asks him to kill Reese instead, telling him the whereabouts of a rural cottage where Reese has taken refuge since the exposé's publication. Reese begs his innocence, but Joe kills him anyhow after learning that he had been delusionally thinking of Reese as the murderer the entire time. Reese is found by Joe, who then tortures him to learn where Marianne is. While everything is going on, Nadia discovers a key in Joe's office that opens a door to a space where he has kept Marianne imprisoned in a glass cage.